100 years ago, in February of 1926, scholar Carter G. Woodson established Negro History Week, which was later expanded to be Black History Month. He chose February as a way of honoring the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, the two people whose legacies Woodson felt had the most lasting impact on Black life in this country. At that time, the prevailing attitude in the United States was not just that people of African descent had never contributed anything to world history, but that they couldn't. Frederick Douglass was one who showed how wrong that attitude was. But the strange thing is, Frederick Douglass didn't actually know his own birthday, or even the year he was born. Long after he was free from slavery, Douglass spoke with one of his former enslavers, Captain Thomas Ould, when Ould was on his deathbed. Douglass recounted telling him, "I had always been curious to know how old I was, and that it had been a serious trouble to me to not know my birthday." He said he could not tell me that, but that he thought I was born in February 1818. However, the only way he was ever able to determine a specific date for his birth was a childhood memory that his mother had once baked him a cake in the shape of a heart, and so he chose to celebrate his birth on Valentine's Day. In 1888, the Bethel Literary Society in Washington, D.C., decided to honor Douglass on his birthday. Hearing this, he said, "I understand you have been celebrating my 71st birthday. What in the world have you been doing that for?" "Why, Frederick Douglass, that day was taken from him long before he had the means of knowing it. Birthdays belong to free institutions. We at the South never knew them. We were born in times, harvest time, watermelon time, and generally hard times." Not only did he not know his own birth date, he didn't know his father's name. His father was white and may have also been his enslaver. Douglass's mother died when he was only 7 years old. She had been sent to work on a different plantation 12 miles away when Frederick was very young. And he saw her only a few times afterwards, and never in daylight, which seemed significant to him. She would walk the 12 miles after working all day, stay until he fell asleep, and was gone before he woke up. Imagine coming from this background and living a life that led to being honored with at least a dozen statues, 2 memorial bridges, an airport, school buildings, a postage stamp, a national historic site, and even a special U.S. quarter. Imagine the Republican Speaker of the United States House of Representatives leading a dedication ceremony for the newly designated Frederick Douglass Press Gallery in the U.S. Capitol just this past Thursday. Imagine a poor slave who himself directly helped at least 400 others escape slavery and gain their freedom, and become the most photographed person in the 19th century. All that and more is the legacy of Frederick Douglass. When still a child himself, Douglass was sent from Thomas Ould's Maryland plantation to Baltimore to help care for the son of Hugh Ould, his master's brother. Ould's wife, Sophia, had not grown up with slaves and began to teach him the alphabet and to read. Her husband soon put a stop to it, telling Sophia that it was against the law to educate slaves. Auld said, in Frederick's presence, "If you teach him how to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave." Hearing that, Frederick became determined to read and write. Here was a chance to be unfit for slavery. He devised a number of ways to continue his education. When Hugh Auld's son brought home school copybooks, Frederick would sneak them off into his quarters and study them. There were poor, hungry white boys in the area who nevertheless attended school. And Douglas would take bread from the house kitchen and tell them that if they taught him what they had learned that day, he would give them bread. When Douglas was 15 or 16, he was hired out for a year to a ruthless man named Edward Covey, who was well known as a slave breaker. While there, Frederick was beaten several times to the point where he felt himself broken in body, mind, and spirit. One day, Douglas was severely sick and collapsed. Covey kicked and beat him. When Douglas recovered, he vowed that he would rather resist than ever be beaten again. And when Covey tried, Douglas fought back. The bully never tried again. In his memoir, Douglas wrote, "This battle with Mr. Covey was a turning point. It rekindled the few expiring embers of freedom and revived within me a sense of my own manhood. It recalled the departed self-confidence and inspired me again with a determination to be free." Back in Baltimore, Douglas worked in a shipyard under the supervision of Hugh Auld. He became a caulker, and while there, he met Anna Murray, a free Black woman. They soon decided to plot his escape to freedom in the North. Anna, who was a housekeeper, provided money and obtained a sailor's uniform. On September 3rd, 1838, Douglas used free papers borrowed from a Black seaman to pass through checkpoints. Traveling first by train, then by ferry, then a second train, a steamboat, and finally another train, he made his way to New York City. The whole trip took less than 24 hours. He later wrote, "A new world had opened upon me. I lived more in one day than a year of my slave life. It was a time of joyous excitement which words can tamely describe." Anna met him in New York, and they were married 11 days later, eventually settling in New Bedford, Massachusetts. They settled there because there was a free Black population, and it was an active center for abolitionists. Unable to find work as a caulker because the white workers feared for their jobs, he did odd jobs around the shipyard. After a while, he began preaching to help support himself and his wife, and he excelled at it. On August 11th, 1841, Douglas attended an abolitionist convention in Nantucket. During the meeting, he was encouraged to speak by William Lloyd Garrison, a leader of the abolition movement. Somewhat reluctantly, Douglas gave his first speech to an all-white audience. An eloquent speaker, he was able to describe the horrors of slavery from firsthand experience. The audience was shocked. Not long after, Garrison was able to get Douglas hired as a lecturer for the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society and then the American Anti-Slavery Society, as a touring speaker, advocating for the immediate emancipation of all enslaved. The 19th century American lecture circuit was a popular, structured, and increasingly lucrative system of education and entertainment, featuring famous authors, politicians, and intellectuals, including Ralph Waldo Emerson, Susan B. Anthony, and Mark Twain. They provided educational, moral, and scientific talks in town halls, churches, and meeting houses, reaching millions of people. Douglas and Garrison became a powerful team, speaking together for more than a decade and writing material for Garrison's newspaper, The Liberator. However, in 1846, Lysander Spooner published a work called The Unconstitutionality of Slavery, which saw the U.S. Constitution as an anti-slavery document. At this time, it was a radical reading of the document, and Garrison didn't accept it. In fact, Garrison had burned copies of the Constitution to express his own view, and even advocated for the North to split from the South. Douglas disagreed. He said that dissolution of the American Union would place the slavery system more exclusively under the control of slave-holding states, adding, "The American people in the northern states have helped to enslave the Black people. Their duty will not be done till they give back to them their plundered rights." But there was more. He'd become convinced that the Constitution was, as he put it, a glorious liberty document, and he saw the Declaration of Independence as a mission statement for the nation. These irreconcilable differences led to Douglas splitting from Garrison in 1847. It was one of the abolitionist movement's most notable divisions. According to African-American historian Clinton Smith, Douglas helped transform the conversation on slavery across the country. And the conversation needed transforming. In 1857, the Dred Scott Supreme Court case, the court said this about people of African descent: "They are not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution, and can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which that instrument provides for." By saying persons of African descent could not be and were never intended to be citizens under the U.S. Constitution, the court weakened the ability of free states to prohibit slavery, while fueling Southern efforts to expand the institution nationally. It could have had the effect of extending slavery to the whole of the United States, and is widely considered to have inflamed tensions leading to the Civil War. After breaking with Garrison, Douglas joined with Black journalist Martin Delaney to found their own liberation newspaper called the North Star. Its motto read, "Right is of no sex. Truth is of no color. God is the Father of us all, and all we are brethren." In 1851, it merged with another paper to form what was called Frederick Douglass's paper. In those publications and in his speeches, Douglas served as a powerful national voice, fighting actively against the Dred Scott ruling and urging abolition, Today, many call him the father of the civil rights movement. With all this notoriety, Frederick Douglass came to the attention of President Abraham Lincoln. During the Civil War, they met in the White House in both 1863 and 1864. Douglass became a trusted advisor. He pushed for emancipation and equal rights for all, including women, urging Lincoln to enlist Black men into the Union Army and championed abolition as a central aim of the war. Then, once Lincoln had allowed Black men into the military, Douglass served as a recruiter. He pushed Lincoln for equal pay and treatment of Black soldiers, which Lincoln did not do. But Douglass did, over time, nudge the president toward a more just and decisive stance on slavery and civil rights. Douglass attended the second inauguration of President Lincoln, positioned very close to the president. Douglass later recounted that when Lincoln saw him at one of the inaugural events at the White House, the president exclaimed, "Here comes my friend Douglass. I am glad to see you. I saw you in the crowd today listening to my inaugural address. How did you like it?" Douglass replied, "Mr. Lincoln, I must not detain you with my poor opinion when there are thousands waiting to shake your hand." But the president said, No, you must stop a little, Douglass. There is no man in the country whose opinion I value more than your own." Only 1 month later, Lincoln was struck down, as we all know. After the assassination, Douglass received a touching gift from Lincoln's widow, the president's own walking stick. He kept it for the rest of his life. After the Civil War, Douglass became pivotal in advocating for the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments as a way to ensure newly freed slaves and all Black people would be citizens with equal legal protections, and while giving Black men the right to vote and overturning the effects of the Dred Scott case. And while he believed strongly in universal suffrage, he was convinced that these amendments were essential first steps, foundational to expanding the Constitution to include all persons, while ensuring the Constitution was an anti-slavery document that could be used to defend against racial discrimination and state-level injustice. Clint Scott points out that while Douglass, of course, wasn't at the Constitutional Convention of 1787, he did play an enormous role in helping the country directly confront the ways that it was failing to live up to its initial promise. After the war, Douglass continued his journalistic work, monitoring and reporting on the enforcement of these amendments during Reconstruction, and he served in multiple political appointments: president of the Freedmen's Savings Bank, United States Marshal for the District of Columbia, and minister resident and consul general to the Republic of Haiti. He died on February 20th, 1895, from a heart attack. Quite a life, don't you think? And one that has much to say to us today. Frederick Douglass's life was a model for speaking out, for speaking directly to the most powerful, for confronting hypocrisy, for being a witness and a moral conscience, for not sitting back and waiting for others to solve our problems, but for recognizing injustice and taking essential actions. Douglass demonstrated the power of the written and spoken word to transform hearts and minds, including the heart and mind of one of our nation's greatest presidents. and in doing so, to change the trajectory of our country. His life, a life that began in slavery, a life that saw him battle against the greatest odds. That life and that example calls on us to demonstrate our own courage and determination. It inspires us to pursue great goals and to achieve them. Today, we are subjected to the efforts of an administration trying to both rewrite and erase history, particularly the history of Black people, but not only. And so today, it is up to us to stand up to this affront to humanity, to these terrible injustices, to what sometimes feels like an endless series of injustices. The good news is that we are standing up, and the good news is that also against great odds, people across this country from all races and creeds, from every walk of life, are finding ways that they as individuals can do their part to demonstrate their own power and courage, and hopefully to once again change the trajectory of our country. So may it be, and amen.